Well, hi, everybody. Welcome. Tim Baker's my name. I wanted to talk a little bit about team identity. We use this word identity a lot in our culture, and it's really important to talk about it because what does it actually mean? If we throw these terms around, we're not sure what it means. I mean, what's a personal identity? What's a team identity? Well, I really want to talk about a team identity today and give you some sense of what that means, because I think really a team leader's role is very much to build a productive team identity. Now, you can create an unproductive team identity, and that's not going to help your team perform at all. So let's have a little look at this whole concept of team identity. And there are three basic features of it that I want to share with you today. And then I'm going to talk about some of the possibilities and ways that you can actually improve your own team identity. So I'm going to share my screen, and then we'll launch into the presentation. So the first thing, as I said, I wanted to talk about what I actually mean by team identity, and then I want to talk about the three characteristics or features of team identity. Bearing in mind, this is my model coming from my book, Winning Teams, the 8 Characteristics of High-Performing Teams. And then I'm going to share with you 8 characteristics, or perhaps I might say 8 strategies to help you build a better team identity. Okay, so what is team identity? Well, in my words at least, team identity is, it refers to the extent to which the members of a team actually identify with the team. So, for example, most teams, of course, are embedded in an organization. And I guess if you were at a barbecue and you were sitting there with somebody and they asked you what you did or where you worked, your response would be very insightful. For example, if you said that you were part of this unit or team or center or whatever it might be, then it's obvious, because they were your first comments, that your whole identity is caught up in that team. But then on the other hand, if you just mention in very general terms that you work for the company or the name of the business or whatever it was, then your identity is probably not tied up as strongly with the team as it is with the company. So the bottom line is, the stronger a team's identity, the more the members connect with the team's ethos. And you can take this too far, and there are plenty of examples in our world where the team identity is so strong that people outside the team can't penetrate the team. And I don't mean physically, I mean psychologically. They can't find a way in because the team identity is so strong. And I see this a lot in organizations. Now, that's unhealthy, because obviously no team is working in isolation. Teams are always interacting with other stakeholders and people inside the organization. So it's critically important that they do that. But a compelling team identity results in the members readily identifying with the team before the organization at large. So that's ultimately what it means. So the job of the team leader is to create a healthy, compelling team identity, but not going too far to the extent to which no one else can penetrate the team, and that in itself becomes detrimental. Okay, so let's look a little bit further at this concept and consider the model of the team identity. So you can see on your screen now, there are 3 features of team identity, and I've identified these, and these come from research, and I've just created titles that are a little easier to remember, and they're called buffering, bridging, and building. So what I'm going to do is talk about buffering, bridging, and building. And what I'm going to suggest to you as a team leader is that your job is to make sure that you buffer, bridge, and build. Now, if you buffer, bridge, and build, it's likely that you're going to create a healthy team identity, one that is actually going to be productive and help the team to perform at its maximum, because that's obviously what you want. But as I said, if you ignore these 3 things, or you go overboard with these 3 things, you'll be creating such a strong team identity that your team will be seen in isolation And that in itself is not a good place to be. So what I want to do now is just talk about each of these and give you a little bit of an overview as to what they are and give you some examples. And then we'll talk about some ways of actually working and building those up. So let's have a look. First of all, let's have a look at buffering. Now, buffering involves protecting the team's resources from unwanted outside influence, distraction, and interference. Now, all teams don't work in a vacuum, and so you're going to be challenged all the time as a team leader. People are going to impinge upon your resources, whether they're technical, human resource, administrative, whatever resources they are. People will want to interfere with those resources. Now, to some degree, as a team identity, you've got to protect your team from these outside distractions and influences and interferences. So if you as a team leader don't buffer, that is, just allow any of these distractions to enter into your team, then what's going to happen is that your team is going to be cannibalized. Your resources are going to be diminished. Your human, administrative, and technical resources will be at the beck and call of other people outside the team. So it is important to some degree for a team leader to do this. But of course, if you went too far with this, obviously you would be not seen as a team player in the broader sense of the word, because you would be stopping or blocking some of the outside forces from entering into your team. So that's what buffering is. And some examples of outside intrusions. What are they? Let's have a look at a couple of them, because I think it's all very well talking about this theoretically, but let's talk about some of the particular examples that we might like to look at. So one example is that a short-staffed team exerts pressure to deploy one of the individuals in your team to another team to restore its capacity. So in other words, somebody in your team might be seconded to another team, or they might be removed from that team to work temporarily in another team. Now, there might be very legitimate reasons for that, but it might also be a complete interference for your team. So for you to buffer would be to challenge that decision, or at least to challenge it at least, but perhaps even to stop it. Here's another example. A project manager working in a matrix organization coerces a team member to attend several time-wasting project meetings. Now, how do you know they're time-wasting? Well, this person might come back to the team and say, well, look, it's really a waste of time for me to attend this 2-hour meeting every week. So that's what they tell you. And you might decide to challenge that because, quite frankly, while they're away for 2 hours, it means that they're not doing perhaps their substantive work in the team. So that would be another example of buffering, where you might challenge that decision and ask reasons for that. Or another example might be excessive administrative procedures that suffocate the team with red tape. And maybe all of this is done under the guise of transparency and accountability. So you might want to challenge some of those administrative procedures that might intrude on your team and their productivity to complete the tasks that they're set out to do. And finally, a manager takes possession of what they believe is a spare computer in your working environment. So perhaps there's a desktop computer there. Somebody decides, well, nobody's sitting there at the moment, so why don't we take that and use it in our own team, because we need that computer. Now, it just so happens that you're in the process of recruiting somebody who will be using, or you plan to use, that desktop. And of course, what happens is that the computer's not there when they arrive, when they're being inducted. So again, you would challenge that decision. And all of these examples are what we call buffering. Now, team leaders have to do this, as I said, to a certain degree. You can obviously go too far with this, but if you don't go far enough, then these sorts of examples that I'm giving you will play out with your team. And I'm sure you'd be aware, you'd have your own examples of those. So let's move on and have a look at what we mean by bridging. So buffering is very much, defending yourself against external forces. Bridging is the exact opposite of buffering. So what happens is that while bridging is an internal defense mechanism that basically shields your team, bridging involves reaching out to critical people and resources beyond your team. So you're actually proactively going out of your way to build better working relationships up with many of the stakeholders that are internal to the business and external perhaps, that you require and rely upon for you to do the work that you do. So just think for a moment, who are the critical resources that you rely on to give you the information necessary for your team to do their job? There's many of them, far more perhaps than you might think at first glance. And it's really important for teams to build good working relationships up with stakeholders. So, having constructive working relationships with key stakeholders is critical. Otherwise, you won't achieve what you've set out to achieve as a team. So bridging strengthens that alliance within and outside the organization. And so, you've got these two things working in tandem, buffering and bridging, so that you keep those things in balance, because they are both critically important for building this robust team identity that I talked about at the outset. Now, the third element is building. So building involves cultivating and sustaining a productive team culture. So this is about creating a culture within your own team. This is basically the way we do things around here. Now, all teams, despite what you might think, has a culture. The question really is this culture effective or ineffective for our team? And so the first thing is to identify what the culture is of the team. And then, of course, the next job is for you to improve the culture of your team. And really, culture, if you're wanting to know in plain English, is really simply the way we do things around here. So harnessing the benefits of diversity, for example, streamlining systems and processes, or promoting continuous improvement, all of those elements actually create a stronger team identity. And they do that by building a good culture. So like buffering, bridging is also an internal focused feature. But unlike buffering, where the strategy is devoted to keeping at bay external forces that might interrupt distracting the team at work, building activities are directed at attracting the energies and enterprise of members of the team for the common purpose. And in contrast to bridging, where the effort's directed at importing critical resources and cooperation from the wider landscape, building entails utilizing team resources to accomplish the task at hand. So you could probably see now where I'm going with this. If you buffer, bridge, and build, you are sustaining and creating a healthy team identity. But if a team leader doesn't make any efforts to do those three characteristics, do those three things that I've talked about, then your team is going to probably have a weak team identity. And a weak team identity actually means that the team member themselves doesn't actually identify with the team, but much perhaps on other areas they might identify with the organization at large. So finally, you can see in the middle there, we've got buffering, bridging, and building, and these are the three features of team identity I've spoken about, but you can see I've added another layer, and the outer layer is the 8 characteristics of high-performing teams. So when someone shows me a high-performing team, it's quite possible that they will be able to do these 8 characteristics, or there'll be evidence of them in their team. Whereas the buffering, bridging and building is built from those. So let's have a look at them, starting at the top and working our way around. So building trust is probably fairly self-explanatory. No team that I know that's successful can work on the basis of a lack of trust. I mean, we actually need to trust our team leader. We need to trust our colleague. And so trust is critically important for teams. And in order for the team to buffer from external distraction, a team has to have a high level of trust between themselves or team members. We need to be able to share the leadership, which basically means that all decisions aren't made only by the team leader. Some decisions, of course, have to be made by the team leader, and that's understood not only by the leader, but also the team members. But there are a lot of decisions that should be made collaboratively, if you like, with all team members engaged in those decisions. And of course, all teams have to be agile. I mean, the world we're working in now is moving at such a rapid rate that we're often always adjusting and tinkering, and the need to be agile is critically important. So if we're agile, we're sharing leadership, and we're building trust, then what we're doing is we're buffering ourselves from the external distractions that are likely to cannibalize our team's resources. So those three very much are important in buffering. Now, what about building? You'll notice I've only got two there. But whilst there's only two, they're also extremely important. So the first one there you can see is creating purpose. So all teams have a purpose. Now, whether or not everybody's clear about their purpose is a completely different question. There's a colleague of mine in the States who's written a great book called Fake Work, not Fake News, Fake Work. And his argument is that a lot of the work done in teams is actually fake. In other words, it's not directly or indirectly attributable to the direction of the team. So if we can improve the quality of our team in terms of the work that it works on and its focus and all the rest of it, one of the things we should do, I believe, is create a purpose statement for our team. So what's the business that our team is actually in? One little exercise you might like to try with your team members, and it's very, very insightful, is perhaps at one of your meetings, you could just go around the room and just ask each person what they believe the purpose of the team is. Now, that's very interesting because it might be that if you've got 4 or 5 people in your team, they've all got a different version of what the purpose is. And therein lies some interesting insights into why people might be doing things that aren't actually directly or indirectly related to the team's identity or purpose. So purpose is very important. And you might say, well, why is it important when we're bridging? Because remember, bridging is reaching out to the key stakeholders in our business. Well, if the team themselves don't know what their purpose statement is, there's no way in the world that other stakeholders are going to know what the purpose of the team is. And therefore, it makes it very difficult for the team to ask for what it needs and wants, and to be able to reach out to the key stakeholders to achieve the information and resources it needs to do its job. So it's really important for a team to have a clear purpose. It's also important, obviously, for a team to manage its stakeholders. And, you know, I've never seen a high-performing team yet in the world of sport, business, arts, politics, anywhere, who isn't a high-performing team because, you know, they basically manage their stakeholders very, very well. So managing stakeholders is critically important. And one of the exercises you might like to do is to just one day just ask your team, who are the key stakeholders in the team, to actually ask them that question. And that can be very interesting because when you start drawing this up on a whiteboard, it's quite interesting because the number of stakeholders continues to grow and grow and grow and grow. And it's quite interesting to note that nearly everybody in the organization ultimately ends up being a stakeholder of your team. in some way, shape or form. So it's an awareness activity to get your team thinking about those things. So now let's move on to the final feature, which is building. So building, remember, is about creating a productive culture in the team. And there are three key things that I just alluded to earlier that are critically important for that to happen. The first of those, but not necessarily the most important, is improving your systems. The way you go about doing your business is critically important to your success. But I find that we're living in a world where we're so pushed for, getting things done that we don't have necessary time to work on the business because we're too busy working in the business. So improving systems is critically important for a team to achieve its optimum performance. And of course, that's part of its culture. And as I said earlier, utilizing diversity. Now, I don't necessarily mean when I talk about diversity as necessarily about gender or ethnicity. Now, those things are important, but let's face it, most of us are given the team we're dealt that team. We don't have any real choice unless someone leaves and we can recruit somebody else. But ultimately, our team is left with the team we've got. So when I talk about diversity, I'm also talking about the way people think. I'm talking about thinking styles. I'm talking about personality. I'm talking about preferences. Do you have blue sky thinkers? Do you have people who basically are very much detailed people? Do you have introverts? Do you have extroverts? All of these different elements in our team can be used to our advantage if we do so. It can also be a source of frustration as well, as I'm sure you're aware. And finally, are we continually learning? Are we continually looking at how we can improve? How can we do things better, faster, easier? How can we do things safer? All of these things are critically important in terms of improving teams. Again, all high-performing teams are always in a state of continuous improvement. And I think any team that gets complacent will end up going backwards ultimately. So those three elements, as you can imagine, would lead and contribute to building a robust culture, which of course would help build a team identity. So there's the model that I've explained to you. And obviously, when you get my book, Winning Teams, the 8 Characteristics of High-Performing Teams, I go into this in great depth. But not only do I go into great depth, I also give you a whole bunch of very practical tools that you can use to apply to building a robust team identity. Okay, so you might be aware, some of you, of course, very loyal to me and come here every Friday at this time, and I've always got a 30-minute session for you, and I've got another one obviously next week on the 30th of September. And what I intend to look at there on the 30th of September is the 3 key elements of productive working relationships in teams. And this is very much research-based, and I want to talk about this. The interesting thing is that if you're looking at building a team and you're wondering where you start, ironically, if you consider there are 2 aspects of teamwork, there's task and there's relationship. If you work on the relationship dimension of your team, it's going to contribute significantly to your performance. But I think many team leaders think it's all about tasks. It's all about clarifying tasks. It's all about streamlining tasks. Of course, these things are important. I couldn't agree more, but the reality is it's normally the relationship dimension that causes grief in teams, where people have misunderstandings, where there's a lack of communication, where people don't pass information on when they should. This is all part of the relationship dimension. So the key thing is, what are we going to look at next week? We're going to look at the 3 key elements. And these 3 key elements will give you an opportunity to start working on your team relationships. Now, all you need to do is click on that link at the bottom of the page there. You will receive a copy of these slides today and the recording. And all you need to do is to go in and register just as you did today, and you're in. So there you are. And one final thing before we wrap up today, I have a special offer for you. If you'd like a copy of my book, Winning Teams, the 8 Characteristics of High-Performing Teams, all you need to do is to send me an email by the close of business today. Now, why would you do that? Well, my book's available for $28 plus postage on Amazon, and I'm going to give my book away to you for $15 plus postage if you send me an email today. So just click on that link, send me an email, and just let me know that you'd like a copy of the book. I will sign it for you, and I'll send it out to you, and you'll get that book in the next few days. So I think you'll find it very interesting. It'll go into great detail about team identity. It'll give you all the tools and resources you need in order to start building a team identity. Also give you some tools to evaluate your team as to where it is across those 8 characteristics I mentioned earlier, so you can kind of know where to start. And that's ultimately important for you. So folks, that's it for me. I'll just close out at this stage. Thanks for your time today. I hope you found that useful, and have a wonderful weekend, and look forward to hearing from you via email. Thanks, everyone. Have a great weekend. Thank you and goodbye.